Formed in Manchester in 1991 on the back of political unrest brought on by a generation of Conservative dominance fuelled by Margaret Thatcher, Oasis got together when Paul McGuigan asked his friends Liam Gallagher and Paul Bonehead Arthurs to join his band alongside Tony McCarroll on drums. Originally calling themselves Rain, the band played pubs and clubs around Manchester until Liam asked his brother Noel to join the group, which resulted in a name change. Oasis' debut album, Definitely Maybe, proved to be one of the seminal records of the 90s and helped to establish the band as one of the biggest groups in British history. With a catalogue of era-defining anthems, Oasis spoke to a lost generation who really did think that they would live forever. I'm Steve Lamack, and throughout the 90s I had a ringside seat to the drama, euphoria and controversy that surrounded these lower-class dreamers who defined a generation. To mark the band's reunion for the first time in 15 years, Josh and the team spoke to some of the key figures in their story to uncover a tale of brutal sibling rivalry, social change and a sense of forward-thinking nostalgia. So, don't look back in anger. Let's say hello to the rock and roll star as we remember the legacy and phenomenon that was Oasis. Exclusively on Beyond the Title.
Writer, lyricist and journalist Sean Hannam followed in his father's footsteps to become a freelance journalist with an interest in music. He first saw Oasis in 1994, around the time of the release of their seminal debut album Definitely Maybe. Now, as a freelancer, he has written a formidable repertoire of works surrounding the history and direction of British music. So, what does a contemporary music journalist feel about one of the biggest music stories of the decade? Let's ask Sean Hannam. So, Sean, welcome back to Beyond the Title. Firstly, let's go back to August 2024. What did you make of the Oasis announcement?
Yeah, I thought it's great. I was really excited about it. I mean, I thought it was great when I first heard it. I mean, I didn't actually think they'd carry it off. You know, initially, I didn't think they'd get back together. I mean, it's been so long. Was it like 16 years? But yeah, I mean, I thought it was really exciting when it first happened, and I just, it was a long time to wait, wasn't it? We had to wait like almost a year, and I think people were thinking it's like that's a long time in Gallagher history. Anything could happen between now and but yeah, I mean, it was great, and I was excited. Obviously, I didn't get a ticket. I wasn't as excited about that. And I guess for me, the excitement was kind of a little bit kind of tempered by the chaos that just followed when people tried to get tickets, the dynamic pricing and all that's been well documented. But I mean, yeah, it's just a shame that couldn't have gone more smoothly because obviously the demand was there, but everyone who wanted to get a ticket couldn't. Everyone was never going to always get the tickets, but it just went chaotic, didn't it? Like it was like one of their scenes from an after show party back in the 90s, or one of their gigs. It just all went a bit ballistic, didn't it? But yeah, I was really excited to see them back together. Yeah.
He waited on the phone for the tickets for 8 hours and didn't get them.
Didn't get them.
No.
Surely you can get them, Josh. I mean, if anything, I can't get them, and I've been writing about them. And I just don't think there are many tickets available out there for like press and PR. I mean, I'm still waiting. I'm still hoping, But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of disappointed people out there. I guess there are a lot of people who didn't see them the first time round, who were a lot younger than me. Probably going to talk about this in a minute, but I was 20 when I saw Oasis, like 31 years ago, and I was lucky to see them in the early days. But there are a lot of people who wanted to go and see them again because it's that reminiscing about the times in the past. And I think for a lot of people, the worlds are quite dark and depressing and difficult place at the moment. A lot of people want that escapism for 2 hours to be able to go and see them. And like during lockdown, I think there were a few of us who kind of went back to our old records of bands we liked in the 90s. We got very nostalgic about things. Yeah. I think that's the case with Oasis. But obviously you have to remember there are a lot of people there who've got into them since they split up. People in their 20s, who never saw them. And that's a great opportunity for for fans who have become fans since they split up to go and enjoy their music. There's a lot of bands that I never saw, who I became fans of, like people like the Smiths, for example. I never saw the Smiths live, and I don't think I ever will. I don't think they're ever going to reform. I think that's a whole different kettle of fish. But yeah, so I mean, it's been good. I think it's exciting, and I was really excited when I saw the footage of them playing at Cardiff for the first night. It was very emotional, actually. I think.
Yeah. Why do you think Oasis became the unlikely poster boys for Britpop?
That's a good question, actually. Well, I think they sort of stood out from a lot of the rest of the crowd, really, because the northern uh, attitude, the look they had. It's funny with Britpop because it was such a weird term that the media came up with. And within Britpop, you had a lot of bands who did the kind of like Blur did, for example, for a bit, the kind of Cockney knees up type thing. You had Suede doing their kind of darker, kind of the sort of seedier side of London. Looking at things like Drugs and that kind of quite melancholy and the kind of, I guess, the sort of dirty glamour, see the underbelly of London. I think Oasis were like kind of like swaggering rock and roll anthems at the time, and it's what a lot of people wanted. You'd had bit bands like the Stone Roses before. They were the kind of the next step on from that, and the songs are great. They're anthemic. A lot of people just wanted those kind of songs to go out with on a Saturday night. That escapism about dreaming of being a rock and roll stars and out on the town and living forever and drinking champagne and smoking and cigarettes. It's just the right time at the right place, I think. And and they were kind of like shouted louder than a lot of the other bands, didn't they? And they had the attitude and they made the headlines because they were brothers as well. They had that dynamic between them, whether they were getting into fights on cross channel ferries or whether they were getting punch ups abroad, doing loads of cocaine. I mean, it's perfect tabloid fodder as well, isn't it? That the press lapped them up, and they caught it depressed as well. We have to remember that they love the headlines, and the bands love them. Sorry, the press loved them. So it was kind of it was like a perfect storm, I guess. Yeah.
And sibling rivalry is one of the major themes of the Oasis story. To what extent is it a vital element of their story?
Yeah, I mean it's so important, isn't it? I mean it's what's brought them back, isn't it? For the reunion, that's what everyone's wanted to see. What will the brothers make it up? They've been at each other's throats for ages, or they drifted apart. It's the perfect story, isn't it? Disenfranchised, disenchanted brothers split up, do their own thing, both successful in their own right. Apart from BDI weren't as successful, were they? But that's kind of people have kind of forget a bit about BDI now. But it's been obviously Noel's solo career and Liam's career has really taken off as well, which has been great. But yeah, it's the ultimate story, isn't it, for the media? They come back, they get on. You look at the pictures of them on stage, and there's pictures of them kind of embracing or bowing to one another, and I mean that's the whole story, isn't it? There's been lots of kind of brothers in bands who've always haven't got on. You've had like the Everly Brothers, you've had like Jesus and Mary Chain. There's always been this sort of Spandau Ballet. There's always been these kind of bands, haven't there, with brothers in them that have caused that sort of sibling rivalry. But I mean, some brothers managed to carry it off and carry on. I can't remember any stories about the Proclaimers bashing the hell out of each other.
When he spoke to David Quantick, he said that it wouldn't happen if it was two women, two sisters.
Yeah, it's probably true, actually. Yeah. Well, I think if it was two sisters, they'd have probably made it up by then, wouldn't they? They're not as stupid and stuff. Folks, they wouldn't have let an argument, trail over from what was it, Paris, where Noel Gallagher stormed out after Liam threw a plum at him. And then the women would have probably got out for a couple of glasses of white wine and talked about it sensibly, wouldn't they? Not that I'm stereotyping, obviously, with white wine, but you know what I mean? We're blokes quite stubborn, aren't they? I've fallen out with people, and it's kind of a pride thing, and you're like, well, you make the first move. No, you make the first move. So yeah, if it's two women, David's probably right. They'd have probably been, they'd probably be on their, I don't know. They'd have probably made about 3 more albums by now if they'd been.
And the 90s were a very eclectic time for British music, with boy bands, rap music, and indie each dominating the charts. Why do you think Britpop had such an affinity with a certain generation?
I think someone else was asking me this the other day about, how Oasis managed to transcend a lot of generations, and Josh was friends with my dad, and I remember, like, my dad loved Britpop. He loved Oasis, and he liked, other bands, Manic Street Preachers, and I think, do you know what, they crossed the generation, and I think, in the early days, like punk, you're supposed to be like, you're not supposed to like the music that your parents like. You're supposed to actually be, anti what your parents like. If you like the Sex Pistols, your mum in the '70s, your mum and dad weren't going to like the Sex Pistols, were they? But I think with bands like, Oasis, particularly, the kids liked them, and then, the parents liked them as well, because they were good songs at the end of the day, and obviously they were very influenced by bands that, from the '60s, like, the Beatles, the Who,
Yeah.
Kinks, Stones. So yeah, I think, I don't think we'll ever see a time like it ever again. You talked about it being quite, it was eclectic, but I mean, a lot of people were into Britpop. It wasn't, as I said, it crossed generations. Whereas now, I think music is a lot more splintered, and there are a lot more, you know, not everyone knows what's in the charts now, do they? Where back in my day, I'm 51. I always knew what was in the charts, and I always knew what was going on. And you heard a lot of that indie music crossed over, obviously, into the mainstream. But now it's so splintered, and there are kind of tribes, but I wouldn't know a lot about, other stuff now of what goes on, because it just feels kind of pockets of music, and people discover their music in a whole different way, whether it's on YouTube or streaming, or whereas it's all we had at the time. Oasis song was on the radio, on the telly, and then it wasn't a Spotify. You couldn't get it. It wasn't Apple Music. You couldn't stumble across stuff like that unless you went to a record shop. So I think that's why I think it kind of, it just crossed and appealed to people of lots of different ages, people who liked a good tune that your postman could whistle at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, uh, oh, yeah, oh, yeah.
Looking at Glastonbury, didn't have a clue who half the people there were this year compared to years gone by.
I know that's the thing. I mean, I write about music as part of my job. I mean, there's people that I haven't heard of as well, but but I kind of specialize in stuff. I do indie stuff, a bit of rock, like Americana. But yeah, I mean, Glastonbury has changed, but it's had to change with the times, because you've had to embrace the younger people's music. It did at the time. Glastonbury has this. It started out, it was basically, David Bowie and Mark Bolan on a toast or whatever, strumming a guitar with John Peel watching. But it's changed over the years, and it's had to adapt. So you have to appeal to a lot of younger people. I'm not saying that younger people don't listen to oldie music, but you've got your kind of your young fan base, so that was taken care of on one night, and then you had Olivia Rodriguez, who I wasn't aware of until only a few months ago. I never heard of her. Last year was Dua Lipa, wasn't it? So yeah, and if you want those younger people to carry on the tradition of going to music festivals, you're gonna have to appeal to all of them. It's no longer just a rock festival. I know, ironically, wasn't it, a few years ago there was a big outburst when, was it Noel Gallagher said, like, there was no place for hip hop at Glastonbury, and then obviously Jay-Z, when Jay-Z was headlining, and then Jay-Z came like, open with a Snatch of Wonderwall thing, and then but yeah, and I think people now realize that Glastonbury is so much more than a traditional just like rock and indie festival, and you've got to embrace younger people's music and different music. To be fair, it's always been pretty eclectic, Glastonbury, but I guess let's face it, a lot of these headliners, some of them aren't some of them aren't going to be around for much longer. So they're getting to the people in this who were in the '60s are now in their 80s. So you've got to where's got to get the new blood coming in. Otherwise, we can't just have the same old, rock stars. I thought Neil Young was great, though, to be honest. Although I went to look for it on iPlayer, and it was not an iPlayer. I think because there was talk of him not being streamed at all, wasn't it, Neil Young? But then he gave in, and they did show it live on the BBC, and I recorded it, and I thought it was a great set, really good. So, but it's something for everyone at Glastonbury, isn't there?
Yeah. And in your opinion, how significant was class in relation to Oasis' star power?
Yeah, I think class is really important. I mean, that's that swaggering image from the streets of Burnage, in Manchester, and that's what they. I think that was what part of the reason, that they did so well. Kind of, they spoke to, you know, the working class person, the everyday person. You know, they hadn't been people who'd been to public school. They hadn't been to, you know, university and things like that. They came from the streets, and it's very much reflected in the music. You know, and in the early days, you know, you read these stories of, you know, how Noel Gallagher was on the dole, or when he was working on a building site and injured his foot, and he, you know, was put into the office, and he sat on his own playing guitar, and he wrote "Live Forever" there. You know, the music would not have happened, I think, if it hadn't have come from you know, from the streets, working class streets of Manchester, and it made it more authentic as well. I think that's the trouble with, you know, with Britpop. You know, people felt that Oasis were more kind of authentic and genuine, and we get other people who, you know, who've got a trust fund and then decided they want to suddenly go to, you know, up, you know, to the Himalayas or Tibet and start recording, you know, songs influenced by, you know, Indian and hippie trails, and, you know, it doesn't feel very authentic, does it? Whereas Oasis, yeah, they came from the streets. They were writing songs about wanting to be rock stars, you know, and that kind of excitement, and, you know, writing songs about smoking cigarettes and drinking alcohol, and most people can relate to that, especially in the 90s.
You want to hear a song? Yeah.
You wouldn't hear a song about a gap year. Josh has never actually asked you this before, and even though he knew your dad for several years, he doesn't really know the answer. So what were your dad's views on Oasis and Britpop as a whole?
Yeah, my dad really liked most of the Britpop bands. Yeah, I mean, as I say, we would sort of listen to their music together, and I can remember buying my dad when Oasis had that Time Flies, the Greatest Hits album came out on CD. I
Yeah.
definitely got my dad for that, for like Father's Day or birthday or Christmas or something. So yeah, I think, as I sort of said earlier, that, you know, the Britpop music did appeal to a lot of older people. You know, they called it dad rock in the papers, which it did appeal to a lot of dads, didn't it? Exactly. And yeah, my dad was into it. I mean, he probably didn't like all the fighting, and, you know, my dad, as famously, my dad had never drunk a pint of beer in his life, and he never smoked a cigarette. So, you know, I imagine he wouldn't have condoned the mentality behind cigarettes and alcohol, but he really loved the music. And you know, he was a big fan of those classic British bands that Oasis have, you know, basically been influenced by. So I think, yeah, at a time when there was, you know, a lot of plastic pop music around, then my dad would have, you know, gravitated towards bands of a kind of, you know, guitar based nature, who wrote memorable songs. And, you know, that's the thing, you know, love or loathe Oasis, they wrote great songs. And, you know, there's been a lot of people, there's been a bit of a backlash, hasn't there, after the people are a bit sick of all this now, because they've been everywhere with the reunion and things. But at the end of the day, you can't take away those songs, and there were classic songs there. You
Yeah.
know, maybe not so much on some of the later albums, but I was having this argument with someone the other day, though, but I still maintain there were great songs on every Oasis album. It's just that the early albums,
Yeah.
first two especially, are great albums. The other albums have their moments, but, you know, I think we'd probably all agree that they're quite patchy. You know,
Yeah.
I don't think my dad bought all the studio albums. Let's just put it that way. I think he probably got the first two. I don't know if he persevered with "Be Here Now." I'm not sure, but I mean, a lot of us did. But you know, it was quite hard work and heavy going, wasn't it?
Um, and obviously we mentioned Glastonbury a minute ago, but another sort of big festival in the music space is the Nebworth gig. Why do you think that has reached legendary status?
Well, I was at Lebworth with my sister, and we actually got a coach up and the ferry from the Isle of Wight to go. And I can't remember much about the gig. I can remember bits of it. I definitely remember them doing whatever with a bit of Octopus's Garden and Mark Felton coming on a harmonica. It's quite sketchy because it was a long time ago. But I do remember it took probably longer to get out of the car park than it did to actually, you know, than the entire set. Well, I think, you know, it was that coming together of a generation, wasn't it? It was the biggest thing that Oasis had done. I mean, I saw them in 1994 in TJ's in Newport when I was at university. I actually got to meet them, went backstage, and I followed them around for the first, you know, I saw about 4 or 5 Oasis gigs in the first year. The biggest one being the Brighton Centre, which was in December 1994, just after Christmas, before New Year's Eve, and that was the biggest UK gig they'd done to that point. And then people who followed them around all got into them. Suddenly went to Nebworth, and it was an event. They did 2 nights there. It was just the culmination of everything that they worked towards for those first 2 albums, I guess. And I can remember going to the first night and then listening to the second one on the radio, where Radio One broadcast it live, and you really wanted to hear those two new songs they played that were going to end up on Be Here Now. I think they debuted My Big Mouth, didn't they? And maybe 2 or 3 songs, Be Here Now, and yeah, at least two songs. So that was really exciting for me. I remember, like, there with my cassette player, in the radio, listening to it and recording it. Probably still got it on tape somewhere, but yeah, as I say, it was that coming together for a lot of people. It was, who hadn't been to things like Glastonbury. It was probably the biggest open air gig they'd ever been to. People who are my age, who were like in their 20s when it happened, and it was good. And there were other things, weren't there? Like, it was the poignant gig for the Charlatans, because it was the first gig they played after Rob Collins, their keyboard player, had died, and he was replaced temporarily by Martin Duffy from Primal Scream. And it was a great lineup as well. You had Prodigy. I saw Prodigy. I was at that one. The Prodigy played. I'm sure it was at. Did they do the first one? I'm sure I saw the Prodigy there. It's all a bit blurry. It was a long time. Definitely, I had more hair then, and I certainly didn't have a big grey beard. But...
Did you go to the famous gig in the London pub?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't. But I tell you, I've got a good Oasis story. So I went to university just outside Cardiff, in a place called Treforest in South Wales. So this was like May 1994, and we got into Oasis. Me and my mates. We bought Supersonic had just come out. We were really into it. I didn't have a record player at university. I only had a CD player, but my mate had a record player. So he bought it on vinyl and I bought it as a CD single. We were really into Supersonic. And we noticed that they were playing in Newport, in South Wales, a venue called TJ's. So we bunked off basically late afternoon from our lectures, and my best mate Mark and his girlfriend Claire, and I think about 3 or 4 of us in the car. And we drove down to TJ's in Newport. You couldn't queue up, on the internet to buy a ticket. You couldn't, we didn't phone up. We just turned up, and it was like, if I remember, tickets were £3 on the door, and we bought tickets. As soon as the doors opened, we queued up. Went to the pub first, then bought tickets. Went in. It was Oasis, supported by the 60-Foot Dolls, who were another kind of Welsh indie rock band trio, who were really good actually. We'd seen them quite a few times before, but yeah, we saw Oasis. So it would have been early May 1994. Well, it's still one of the best gigs I've ever seen. It was in a tiny little, basically a pub or club, TJ's. And when Liam Gallagher walked out on stage, you just you knew he had the attitude. It's that thing that people have said, he was like cross between sort of John Lennon and John Lydon. He just oozed charisma. And then when the songs, you heard those songs for the first, a lot of them for the first time in that set, Shake and Make It Live Forever. It was just a great experience. And the best bit was afterwards, we then got invited backstage, which is not very glamorous. It's just like a little room, but next, behind the club. And Noel Gallagher offered us some beer. We sat and chatted with all the band. I got Noel and Liam's autographs. All I had on me at the time was a matchbox, because it was when people used to smoke, you could smoke indoors. So I got the matchbox, opened it up, and got Noel and Liam Gallagher to sign it. And I've still got that as well. And then after that, we went back to the hotel, which was the King's Head Hotel in Newport, just around the corner from the venue. But all the fans from the gig, a lot of them went back. Liam Gallagher was walking down the street in this long leather jacket with loads of people behind him. We all walked down to the hotel, which was shut. Liam was pounding on the door and got everyone let in. And then when we walked in, the bar in the hotel was actually called the Oasis Bar. Which was, there's a very famous photo taken of Liam Gallagher on the cover of the NME, when he's got like the Oasis bar, Oasis above his head, and Kevin Cummins took it. And it was done there. I think it was done either the morning after with the gig or the morning before. But so we went into the after show party, which was brilliant. And then my overriding memory of that is there's a lot of people drinking there in the bar. It's a real kind of entourage, and fans, bands, hangers on like us, but also. Bonehead was sat there's a piano in the bar. Bonehead was playing a Blur song. So they did
mm,
a version of Lazy Sunday by the Kinks, but they changed the lyrics to "Wouldn't it be nice to be in effing Blur?" And they're all like doing Cockney knees up, Liam and like Noel around the piano. And then Bonehead started playing Imagine on the piano, and Liam Gallagher basically sang Imagine at the piano, and we were watching. But it all got picked up in the press. So, like the next week in the NME, there's stories about them being on the road in Newport, and they played Portsmouth as well. That was the closest they came to the Isle of Wight. I think they played the Wedgwood Rooms on that same tour. Maybe yeah, I think then it was the night before or the night after Newport. They played they played Portsmouth. So yeah, I mean, it was a good time for me, and we started following them around a bit. We went to see them at the Venue, which was a music venue in New Cross, and then we saw them in Cardiff Astoria as well, which was a great gig as well. A bit lively. There was sort of I think Cardiff had a ruck with Man City football wise, and there was a bit of attitude in the audience. But I got so you might have seen this, but on social media last week, I posted the picture of the ticket because I've still got it from Cardiff Astoria, and I paid £4 to see Oasis in June 1994. You know, you wouldn't even get a pint for that. Wouldn't get a half pint for that now at the Cardiff Stadium, would you? But yeah, so I'm one of those old blokes who saw them the first time round, but it was nice to be a part of it. But then it got too big. I saw them, you know, I did go to Nebworth, but then after that, I did see them again, Finsbury Park, and I saw them at the iTunes Festival in the Roundhouse in Camden. That wasn't great. That was towards the end, and Liam was swearing and was in a really bad, foul, belligerent mood and arguing with Noel on stage. And it's sad, you know. But that was how it ended for me. So I would actually like to go back and see them again now because the reviews have been great, and I had friends who went and said they sound better now than they ever did back in '94. You know, which is
only one time who that it would be wrong now.
He said he wonders how much that ticket that you got for £4 would be worth now.
I don't know. Maybe I should go on Antiques Roadshow or something. You know that they do. I got interviewed on the radio about this the other day, and I said to someone maybe I could get it evaluated on Antiques Roadshow and work out how much it's worth, and then if it's worth a lot, maybe I could then sell it and then try and bribe someone to get me a ticket for one of the gigs at Wembley. But I don't think it's going to happen. But I've got it, and I like to hold on to it. I've got I like my memorabilia and things like that, and I'm lucky enough throughout my career to get things signed by lots of people. But I have met Liam Gallagher once since. I had a really random encounter with him in a pub in Soho on a Friday afternoon when I was working, and I just come out of a meeting, was going into another one in the pub. That's how we used to do our meetings on Fridays. When I still can actually, if I want to, if being a journalist. But yeah, I met him briefly. That was when he was in BDI, but they hadn't announced that BDI had split, and he was just really charming, and we just sat in the pub all afternoon and had a chat and had a drink. And I was actually telling him that I'd seen him back in 1994. I think he was actually quite impressed by it, and we had quite a good laugh. And then didn't get any pictures. He didn't want any pictures taken. It was fair enough, you know. He was on his own in the pub. But when he found out I was a journalist, he was initially a bit skeptical. But when I told him I wasn't a tabloid journalist, he warmed to me. So yeah, but I don't know him well enough to be able to say, can you get me on the guest list? Unfortunately, so I might be sat watching it on the internet again, or picking up clips on Instagram. But yeah, still hope, isn't there? You know, I only live 40 minutes from Wembley now, so it's easier for me to get there and back. So let's put out an appeal. You know, Josh has got to go first, obviously, and then if you get a spare one, Josh, I'll be your plus one.
And throughout history, bands and artists have identified with a specific social demographic. But why do you think Oasis were able to perfectly identify with a generation of music fans in a way that had never been seen before?
Oh, that's a big question. Well, you know what? Maybe because it wasn't too kind of intellectual, and that's not one to put it down, but maybe it's kind of from the heart rather than from the head. I think maybe that it just connected with people on an emotional level. Maybe that some other music didn't. I mean, I've always been. Well, I like clever lyrics in songs, but I also like a good tune, and I like I like basic, good old fashioned basic rock and roll, and I think maybe that's why. Maybe it was just the right time and the right place, and people wanted that kind of rock and roll thing. I talked about Suede earlier. You have bands like Suede and Pulp, you know, slightly more highbrow, maybe, slightly more esoteric, maybe. Whereas Oasis just cut through that, and they just kind of, it's that sort of songs about, you just want to embrace people on the football terrace, or you want to, hold your pint up in the air, and like people have been doing it at Cardiff or whatever gigs, or covering each other with beer. I think maybe that sometimes that cuts through. Some people kind of think, well, actually, some music is a little bit too clever for its own good, a little bit too arch, and maybe just Oasis just were just as I said, the right time, the right place. People wanted a bit of good old fashioned rock and roll, and I think, to be fair, I think we need that a bit now, really. I think not wanting to sound like one of those old geezers who's like shouting at the clouds, but there aren't many great rock and roll bands that have been around recently. And I think there are a lot of great. There's a lot of great music out there. I listen to a lot of new music, but bands that are just like where's the next great British rock and roll band coming from? That's I think Arctic Monkeys maybe maybe they did it for a bit, but then I don't think they crossed over into like Oasis did. And they certainly in the past few albums they've gone more left field, which I've really enjoyed the past few records. But I think it's interesting. I mean, I think you think about Oasis as well. People kind of some people wanted them to change musically and become more developed, and when they did that, then some people didn't really like it when they tried to go a bit more psychedelic, or they tried to kind of get involved, with samples and loops like they touched on some of the later records. I think people just want Oasis to be a good Saturday night rock and roll band, and I think from looking at the sets on from Cardiff, it's primarily based on the first two albums and the early B sides. I think they played. Do you know what I mean? From Be Here Now, and then Little by Little, but from later on. But I mean, it's not much else there from the first two albums, is there? Which is, I think people didn't really want Oasis to change and become experimental and do a freestyle dub album. It just wouldn't have worked, would it? Really,
Yeah. Um, I read them to what they remembered.
Those first two albums are what they're remembered for.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, although I see the record companies they've announced an Oasis box set of all the albums on one CD box set and a vinyl box set already. So I mean, yeah, they're the two classic albums, aren't they? If you're going to take any Oasis albums out of what they do, six, yeah. But yeah, they're the two classics. But as I say, I do like the other albums. There were great songs on all of them. I mean, I was looking at this set list the other night thinking, oh, before they announced it, I was like wondering what they'll play. And it is quite surprising they've not played things like Lila, Shock of the Lightning. They've not played Stop Crying Your Heart Out, which I always like that song. Tailor made for England crashing out of the World Cup. You always hear it, as soon as England crash out of a sporting event, they always black and white montage, and you get Stop Crying Out over the top of it. Perfect song for that. Yeah, Songbird. I mean, there's some good tunes on all those later Oasis albums. I've just read Ted Kessler's book. Ted Kessler and Hamish McBain have written a good book, which is like all songs by Oasis. It's a guide to every song by Oasis. Which is good. And there are songs you've forgotten about, songs that probably need reappraising. Some songs you're like, yeah, they weren't very good. I mean, but there's good songs on all of those records, I think. But it's just that some of the quality control went out the window towards the latter part. Well, some might argue it went out of control with Be Here Now, but then that was an album that was kind of famously recorded in a blizzard of cocaine, wasn't it? And Noel Gallagher would admit, he was, shoving all the guitar track, filling all the guitar channels up there with loads of just heavy guitar and stuff like that. So very much of its time. But yeah, I mean, will they change the setup in a few, mix the setup a bit in a few gigs time? Probably not. But it'll be nice to hear some of his other tunes, I think, though, because there were some kind of lost, forgotten Oasis songs that probably need to be aired again. But who knows? Maybe they'll come back for another, reunion tour. Maybe, give it a couple of years and come back and do I don't think anyone wants to Be Here Now tour, do they? But they could mix some songs up, couldn't they, and play some of the other tracks from some of the later albums. And I think the fans would lap it up, to be honest. I mean, they'd go for it, wouldn't they? As long as they get to hear the classics, there's always a bit of opportunity to throw some curveballs, aren't there?
Yeah. When Josh interviewed Neil Brand a few weeks ago, he said that Britpop may have been the last period where music perfectly echoed what was happening at the time. Firstly, do you agree with that? And secondly, if you do, why do you think that was?
Yeah, I think it probably was, and it's like because as I touched on earlier, I thought it was a movement that a lot of people were into because it echoed what was going on in I guess that kind of that culture is what kind of people it's like a perfect storm, as I said earlier, that you got the political situation, that the new Labour thing, the new Hope thing.
Yeah.
You've got people going out. We had more money in our pockets then. I think it's very much driven by people going out. Um, drinking, big drinking culture, big pub culture, going to gigs, and I think it was just it just cut across different people's age groups. Whereas I just it's like punk did, I guess, but punk was only really for a disenfranchised younger kind of youth. Whereas with Britpop, it seemed to kind of it became so big, didn't it? And it became it dominated everything. But you also, it wasn't just Britpop as well. I remember you had like you had the Spice Girls as well at the same time, didn't you? So you had pop music and you had sort of guitar music, and they were both kind of going hand in hand, really, I think. And then you had obviously things on TV, like Chris Evans with like TFI Friday. It was all very much focused around that kind of that whole kind of zeitgeist, wasn't it? And I think, yeah, I don't think you'll see the like of it again. I don't think. I mean, the music industry has just changed so much now. The way people access music has changed so much now. People, we aren't all listening to. As I said earlier, we aren't all paying attention to the charts. We aren't all listening to the radio to hear our music. So, yeah, I mean, I just think it was nice to be a part of it. I guess it was. To some extent it's a bit of a cliche, wasn't it? But it was like our swinging '60s, I guess. But I guess maybe the swinging '60s was only really a small thing that was enjoyed by people in Carnaby Street and the King's Road, whereas Britpop was nationwide, wasn't it? It went everywhere, and you didn't have to be part of the kind of the swinging London set to enjoy it. It was for everyone. You had lots of different styles in music, as you mentioned earlier in Britpop. So if you didn't like Oasis, you probably liked Suede, or you liked Manic Street Preachers, or you liked some of the other stuff that was on Creation Records. The Brie Radleys, who I was a big fan of. So and some people, there's something for everyone, wasn't there, with Britpop? It was, you could dip your toe in, or you could enjoy lots of different stuff from it as well. And then from that, and then yeah, I mean, it was a fun time. I'm glad I lived through it and was there and got to see bits of it. I mean, I lived in London at the time. I'd probably for the best. I'd probably be dead if I'd been living in London during the Britpop. It was, it was rock and roll enough living in South Wales, and that was out. But yeah, I think it's nice to look back on it though, and there's a lot, there was a lot of great music around there. There's a lot of terrible music as well, obviously, but it was good, and I don't think we'll see the like of it again, anything like that. I just don't think, yeah, the world has moved on now, hasn't it? It's such a different place.
It's funny. Yeah. Mm, With every ovation. If he hadn't been there, go everyone. Yeah, so wrong everyone. I don't would have been so powerful.
Well, funny you mentioned Chris Evans, because Josh feels that if he hadn't got all those people onto his show and had the influence that he had, the Britpop might not have been as big as it was.
But yeah, I don't think. I think Ocean Colour Scene would have probably had a career, would they? Without TFI Friday. I mean, that was the Riverboat song became the theme tune, didn't it? And that
Yeah.
exploded. So yeah, I was thinking about this the other day because yeah, it was such a fun time, and it was quite a dangerous, edgy telly at the time, wasn't it? And
Yeah.
you wouldn't get away with it now. You know, I remember all the times he got in trouble with Sean Ryder swearing,
Yeah.
like David Bowie playing darts and stuff like that, and Morrissey. It was just such a, you know, it was such an exciting time. You know, it was like a real kind of like event TV, wasn't it? Again, you know, people would, if they weren't in the pub, they would be around, you know, watching it. It was like, whereas again, that doesn't happen now because of, you know, because of streaming and, you know, and catch up. You know, you know, maybe, you know, maybe if they did show the Oasis concert live on telly, you get a few people, you know, coming together at the same time to watch it. But it's just not like that anymore, is it? It's just you don't have that. You know, it's like my mum and dad used to say. You know, it's you'd always get Christmas back in the 70s. You'd stay in and watch the Morecambe and Wise show, and everyone did it. You know, no one went out for it, and I, you know, to a lesser degree, but obviously TFI Friday was a bit like that, wasn't it? It was, and people were always talking about it the next day. You know, did you see so and so swearing on there? Did you see what happened? And you know, but yeah, just I guess it was like I guess it was a natural successor to things like The Word, which was, you know, quite groundbreaking TV as well, and that, you know, stick a load of kids in with bands and whatever, and give them alcohol, and you know, and you know, and it kind of worked, didn't it? It was. We're still talking about it now, aren't we? We can remember moments from
Yeah.
EFI Friday. We want to stick to mind is when Sean Ryder was just swearing and going out Chris Evans' face, and he's like, "No, not again. We've won a warning already." But and Bowie and things like that, you know. I guess people, to some extent, people you thought were a bit untouchable, you like Bowie, whatever, proper pop stars, you know, turned up in the studio and they did that, and I think, you know, that was kind of cut through that mystique a bit as well. That and yeah, it was a fun time. I think, you know, I never went up to the studio to see it being recorded or anything like that, or take part in it. But yeah, it looked like a lot of fun. But
and what would you say after all of this, with the announcement and everything going into the future, the legacy of Oasis is going to be?
I think, well, the music is always going to live on, isn't it? It's going to live forever. That's terrible. Sorry. But I think well, let's just see if they get through the tour. You know, if they do the whole tour, what will happen then? Will they be tempted back to do anything else? Do you know what? I don't think I really want them to make another record. I know Liam Gallagher sort of told people they were, and then admitted he'd been lying, didn't he, when he posted it on X a few months ago. I don't think they need to make another record. I think, you know, in an ideal world, they just get this tour out of the way, done, end on a high, and then probably just go off and take the money and, you know, go their own separate ways again. And you know, Noel would carry on with High Flying Birds, and Liam would carry on with his solo career. But it's interesting, isn't it? I don't know. It's where do they go next? But personally, yeah, I don't think they should make another record. I don't think, you know, but it depends, wouldn't it? It's if they get on, and Noel's got some cracking songs. But I think it should probably just, you know, well, quit while they're ahead, you know, and go out on a high, you know, and it's better to go out with a, you know, in a massive burst of a champagne supernova in it than I don't know, fade away.
He likes what you did there.
Oh, that's why they paid me the big bucks. No, and that's why I'm a struggling freelance music journalist.
Writer, journalist and entertainment critic David Quantick has become one of Britain's most versatile and respected writers in a career spanning 5 decades. Beyond that, he's become a beloved regular on Beyond the Title over the years. Joining the NME in the midst of the punk revolution of the late 1970s, Quantick was in the perfect place to chart the narrative of British music throughout the 1980s and into the early 1990s, when acid house was promptly replaced by guys and guitars. The final years of his NME career were marked by a sense of change, as Britpop took hold and the Gallagher brothers became the unofficial poster boys of this revolution. To mark the band's reunion, the man of many talents shares his thoughts on the legacy of Oasis and reflects on their journey so far. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back David Quantick.
It's weird, the Oasis reunion. I mean, first, I have to say, during the Britpop days, I was always more of a fan of Oasis than Blur. So I'm kind of amused because when Blur had their documentary out and Blur have reformed several times, and people are like, okay, that's nice. But Oasis, people have gone completely over the top. And which is kind of nice because I always liked Oasis, and but that's just petty. I'm not surprised because, you know, they were definitely on the list. There's a ratio, basically. How likely are they going to get together? And the more likely, the less interest there is. You know, and so the extreme end, you've got the Beatles. They're not going to get back together because two of them are dead. But if, and then there's lots of bands. I'm not going to name any. I'll be polite. If they got back together, people will be like, I can't be bothered. But Oasis, because they have this deep-seated problem, we could call it, or loathing, we could call it, with each other, them getting back together is a big event. And yeah, and then I'm going on a bit, but then you've got the thing of the ticket prices suddenly coming in. People going, Oasis don't care about the fans. It's like, they're not that kind of band. You know, they never went and did nice things for fans, particularly. They just wanted to be, all their songs are about being famous and rich and successful and being very selfish. So, yeah, nobody really cares apart from some people who want to care.
Yeah. And I so man yeah only to realize no only I what
So I was listening to the Oasis documentary last night, and I didn't realize just how fractured their relationship always seemed to be, even back when they were first starting out.
Well, I mean, it's horrible. I don't really know a lot of the early stories about their childhood, but you know, they had a disrupted childhood. Um, I don't know much about it, but Noel seems to have had a real problem with Liam. And I think, you know, it seems to stem from that, but I don't really know. But yeah, if you've ever heard the early interviews, the thing is, it didn't matter so much then because they were really funny. And it was kind of part of the joke that they didn't get on. But yeah, I don't know. But they were always having fun. You know, it's like they never made it in America basically because I think they had an argument as soon as they got there, joining the long list of British bands who couldn't handle America. And it's weird. There just seem to be two kinds of brother in the world, you know. Brothers who get on okay and brothers who just cannot. Somebody told me a story about Jim Steinman, the producer, producing the Everly Brothers, and the Everly Brothers got together for a reunion, and it didn't last. And they said to Jim Steinman, "What happened?" He said, halfway through a song, one of the Everly Brothers said something. The other one said, "You had sex with my wife," punched him in the face, and walked out.
God. Jesus.
There's something about there's something about the forced closeness of being a brother. You can't escape your brother. You've always got too many things in common. And in, 1989, they got a biscuit and you didn't. And you've never got over it.
you we
Oh, do you think that happens with sisters?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think of bands with sisters in, and I haven't heard it. There's a rock band called Heart with Anne and Nancy Wilson. There's All Saints. I think there's sisters in that group. I think my answer would be no, because women, I'm generalizing, tend not to bottle it up. Women tend not to take a load of abuse, then suddenly jump out of a back alley and batter you. Men tend to do that. Men really do. I'm not joking, you know, I'm not joking about the grudge thing. Men really do remember that you took the wheels off their dinky toy in 1968, and then one day they push you down a hill.
So, with such an overwhelming response to the Oasis announcement, how do you think this might alter the narrative of Britpop?
Well, Oasis, I mean, it'll alter it in the sense that, and I know I'm biased, Oasis won. You know, when there was the famous chart battle with Roll With It and Country House, I think Oasis, they were the ones who got to #1, or am I wrong?
No, no. Blur.
Blur.
It was Blur. Oh, well.
Yeah.
We'll forget that. But in terms of, I don't know, it's the Britpop narrative, which is Blur versus Oasis, because all the other bands don't count in one sense. But it was basically arty, southern, middle class, clever versus just working class attitude. It's like when Blur did a Beatles type song like Beetle Bum, it was like, oh, aren't they amazing? They're so clever. They've really when Oasis did it was like, let's just sing like the Beatles. They were like a tank. You know, Blur was like somebody very clever, a chef, putting lots of ingredients into beautiful soup. Blur were like a T-Rex that just ate everything else. I mean, Britpop's interesting because it's kind of like a comedy. You know, you've got Oasis, the aggressive dad, Blur, the kind of clever and talented one, the pretty one. Then you've got Jarvis Cocker, the ironic, really smart one. You've got Suede, you know, all these different groups. And they all form kind of a nice group.
And they all had their own hero.
And they all had their own little idiosyncrasies.
Yeah, they did. And I could go through them all, but it's and also you get the great thing with the popular movement when people are pulled in, like the Manic Street Preachers, who predated Britpop and just got thrown into it because they wrote a song about being drunk, even though they were kind of a weird intellectual glam rock band. Dodgy, who were friends of mine, they'd been going for years, but because they wrote 60s guitar tunes, they were Britpop. But in the end, Britpop, and it's weird, I don't know, Suede I don't think are really Britpop, although clearly they are. But Britpop in the end was Blur and Oasis. And so, yeah, the short answer, it affects the Britpop narrative because Oasis, unless they split up, which is brilliant, and there have been millions of jokes about Oasis splitting up before the show. But what Oasis should do is stay together, make a terrible album that's a reunion album, and then split up again on stage. That would be, sorry.
Yeah, or when they go to do the first gig opening night, Liam just doesn't come out.
It's possible. That's what's so exciting. If you go and see a Blur reunion, or, you know, the Lighthouse family, or Take That, you know they'll all be there, but it's genuine. And it might not be Liam. It might be Noel. You just don't know.
Or neither.
Or neither. There might be none of them turn up. It might just, since we don't actually know who's in Oasis, the band, it might be just 3 session musicians on stage playing electro to live forever for half an hour.
Obviously, we live in a totally different world than when Oasis last ruled the world. How do you think Britain's socio-economic structure has changed since then?
Gosh, that's a big question. Well, when they came along, of course, it was Tony Blair. You know, there's that famous photo of Blair and Noel drinking champagne at number 10. And it fit because Oasis were, as I say, all about success. They were working class success. They were like, you know, we're going to have it. We're going to drink and have sex and take drugs and be rich and be British. And that kind of fit with the fact that the economic situation in 1990, whatever, seemed quite rosy and people felt safe voting for Labour because they had money. Now, obviously, it's rather different. Now, Oasis are kind of a tonic in the dark. I can't imagine, I like Keir Starmer, I can't imagine him inviting Noel to number 10. He just would go, I actually don't like you. Keir Starmer likes Orange Juice, the band. He's an indie kid. He probably finds Oasis a bit distressing.
Yeah.
But he wrote the rookie late night.
Yeah, he won't go to the gig because it's a bit of a late night.
Oh, that's harsh. I'd probably send Angela Rayner and she'll go to the after show and take loads of ecstasy. Or not.
Anyway, the 90s arguably saw the autonomous powers of the music magazine. In your opinion, how influential were publications like The Enemy in taking Britpop out of concentrated areas like Camden and Manchester and putting it on the musical map?
I think it's the other way around. Because the thing I always say about The Enemy and the other papers, whose names I've forgotten, is that when young white men with guitars are successful in the charts, The Enemy and those papers do well. And when music is like black music or dance or pure pop, those papers don't sell. And The Enemy did work hard to promote Oasis. They famously put them on the cover when they'd had one single out. But that's just part of it. Oasis's success is largely due to the fact that radio and MTV played their videos and their songs. Enemy's great thing was that it was able to speak their language in a way that, you know, they were good in the tabloids because of the fighting, Noel and Liam. But an Enemy interview with Oasis, there's that famous, it's on YouTube, an EP called Wibbling Rivalry, which is an interview that John Harris, now a Guardian writer, did with Noel and Liam. And it's really funny. And it actually was a hit. That's how popular they were. They had an interview single as a hit. But yeah, The Enemy contributed to their success. But I think Oasis really contributed more to The Enemy's success.
But that was the era of go now
So that was during the golden age of the music magazine. If you think it happened now, do you think it would be as powerful?
Not in terms of music papers, which are really gone, but who knows? I don't think it would happen this way now. The way that pop and rock music exist, music papers are very much in the background. They're more like a grandparent who no one can remember, who turns up at a wedding and everyone's like, I thought he was with you.
So this is a bit like the chicken and egg situation, but how do Enemy and similar magazines contributed to the rhetoric of Britpop, and how influential was it to the potency of Oasis?
It's a good question. The Enemy and Melody Maker, I remember their name, they were always making up genres, kinds of music, shoegaze, Camden lurch, post-punk, yacht rock. And Britpop was something that was made up. There's arguments about who made it up. But famously, there's a cover of Select magazine. I think it's Brett from Suede and a Union Jack. And it was the first time somebody had made those connections between Britishness and rock music, but also with the retro thing. That, you know, it was very obviously referring to the 1960s British invasion popularity of British music, but only a certain kind. You know, at the same time in the world, you had all this fantastic new dance music, people like the Chemical Brothers, Left Field, Fatboy Slim. You had all kinds of, loads of great black music, all kinds of fantastic stuff going on. And in America, you had the huge popularity of grunge. But the music papers decided to just concentrate on Britpop because what they were used to was indie guitar music. And I've totally forgotten the question. I'm very sorry.
It was just about how do you think the Enemy and similar magazines contributed to the rhetoric of Britpop, and how influential was it to the potency of Oasis?
Okay, the answer is they totally did. They couldn't believe their luck. You know, finally, there's a kind of music that sells papers and in much bigger quantities. All the music papers were going into a sales decline at this point, killed off by loads of things. So the Enemy and other papers were probably selling more than they had done for 20 years. As for the rhetoric of Britpop, yeah, basically they set out the rules. They told people who read The Sun and The Guardian what Britpop was and provided a handy guide for DJs. So they sort of wrote the guidebook to it.
Where do you been on the do you think he would
Where do you stand on the article with Stuart McConey all those years ago? Because he was apparently the first one who coined the term Britpop.
That's right. I don't think I ever read the article. Yeah, there's a writer called John Robb who says he coined the phrase. And he did, but I don't think he was talking about Blur, Suede and Oasis. Yeah, Stuart was a lot more into it. I'm not really a fan of Britpop. Stuart really is. Stuart liked everything about it. So I'm a friend of Stuart's, but beyond that, I don't listen to, you know, I actually do listen to Oasis occasionally. My wife really loves Pulp, but I haven't got it. And Blur's one of those bands like Nick Cave. I keep trying to like them. And I respect the talent, but I'm not interested.
I thought it was
It's funny because back when we interviewed John Robb a little while ago, he actually claimed to be the one that coins the term Britpop. So we think it just might be one of those sort of issues that never ever get solved.
No, but it's perfectly possible for two people to have the same idea. I think at NME for about 10 seconds, there was, honestly, this is not a joke, there was talk of calling it Lion Pop. Yeah, if you Google Lion Pop or Lion Rock, yeah.
Where did they get Lion?
Where did they get Lion Pop from?
I think it was me. I think I just said it for a joke once with no meaning. right? Oh, we could call that, and then they liked it. And this was Stuart McConey and Andrew Collins, who were basically the kings of Britpop at the NME. So I think it was a joke that nearly got used, but yeah. It
Interesting.
may not be true. I'm pretty sure it is, but I like the idea that Britpop was nearly called Lion Pop.
So why are the Gallagher brothers gold dust to the entertainment journalist?
One, they're a soap opera. Two brothers who don't get on, a constant feud that never ends. Every interview with the Gallagher brothers always contains the question, will you get back together? Are you speaking to your brother? Two, they're very funny. Liam is interesting. Noel's a funny man deliberately. Liam's just funny. Liam says things that are quite bizarre. He's got a real natural wit. And of course, four, is it? They're incredibly successful. You know, they were a huge rock band. When you're a music paper reader, you sometimes forget that the bands you like are actually successful and rich. But they made a vast amount of money, and they were really popular all around the world.
In your opinion, with this Oasis comeback and Blur's ongoing success, how has this given a new dimension to the story of Britpop?
Well, I think it just proves that nostalgia never dies. And Britpop was already nostalgic when it started, you know, which is one of the reasons I don't like it, because it was about the past instead of the future. I think the worst thing that will happen is there will be new Britpop bands. I think teenagers will be tricked by the success of Oasis and Blur into forming similar bands, and it won't be safe to walk the streets.
You can't argue